Picture this: a sleek, three-tiered warship slicing through the turquoise Aegean, its oars moving in perfect unison like the wings of some mythical beast. This is the ancient Greek trireme, a marvel of naval engineering that ruled the waves for centuries. But here's the mystery: how did shipwrights, working with nothing but timber, rope, and sheer ingenuity, craft vessels so advanced they became the backbone of empires? These weren't just boats, they were floating fortresses, faster and deadlier than anything the Mediterranean had ever seen. And yet, despite their legendary status, the secrets of their construction remain shrouded in riddles. How did ancient builders achieve such precision without blueprints or modern tools? What hidden techniques allowed these ships to outmaneuver and outlast their rivals? The answers lie scattered in the whispers of sunken wrecks, the fragmented notes of historians, and the painstaking work of archaeologists piecing together clues like a maritime jigsaw puzzle. From the revolutionary hyposomata, the tension cables that acted like a spine for the hull, to the mysterious bronze ram that could sink an enemy ship in seconds, every detail reveals a level of sophistication that still baffles experts today. Even now, replicas built using ancient methods struggle to match the speed and agility described in historical accounts. What did the Greeks know that we've yet to rediscover? Were their shipyards humming with lost technologies, or was it simply a mastery of materials passed down through generations? This isn't just a story of wood and nails, it's a tale of human ambition, of a civilization pushing the limits of what was possible. These ships carried explorers to uncharted shores, ferried philosophers and warriors, and decided the fate of empires. Yet for all their fame, the trireme's full story remains tantalizingly out of reach. So join us as we dive into the depths of history, unraveling the naval innovations that changed warfare, examining the famous wrecks that hold untold secrets, and confronting the archaeological puzzles that keep scholars awake at night. By the end, you'll see these ancient vessels not as relics, but as testaments to a brilliance that still echoes across the waves. The sea kept their secrets, but not for much longer. To understand the trireme's brilliance, you have to start with the waters it was born to conquer. Greece's coastline wasn't just a border, it was a labyrinth of jagged rocks, hidden coves, and sudden storms. Thousands of islands dotted the Aegean like stepping stones, each one a potential harbor or ambush point. This wasn't the open ocean where heavy, deep-hulled ships could lumber along safely. These waters demanded something nimble, something that could dart between reefs, pivot on a dime, and flee or chase at a moment's notice. And so the trireme evolved, shallow enough to beach on sandbars, yet sturdy enough to weather the Mediterranean's fury. But geography wasn't the only challenge. The very land itself worked against the shipbuilders. Greece's rocky hills yielded little of the towering timber needed for massive hulls. Unlike the Egyptians, who floated entire fleets of cedar down the Nile, Greek craftsmen had to make do with shorter, thinner planks, often importing pine from Macedonia or fir from the Black Sea. Every scrap of wood counted. That scarcity forced innovations we still marvel at today. Instead of nails, which could split their precious lumber, they used wooden pegs, swelling when wet to seal joints tighter than glue. To outwit shipworms gnawing at their hulls, they lined planks with thin sheets of lead, an ancient equivalent of Kevlar armor. And then there were the routes themselves. The Aegean wasn't just water, it was a highway for grain from Egypt, silver from Spain, and olive oil from Athens. Pirate skiffs lurked in every shadow, while rival cities-states like Corinth and Aegina clashed over control of narrow straits. The maps tell the story. Battle sites cluster around choke points like Salamis, where triremes didn't just fight, they danced. A fleet's survival hinged on its ability to row backward as fast as forward, to spin and strike before the enemy could react. It's no accident that the Greeks called their ships the wings of the sea. Yet perhaps the most surprising twist, these vessels weren't built by some centralized navy. They were crafted in small, competing ports, each city-state refining designs through trial and error. Imagine dozens of rival workshops, all racing to build a faster, deadlier ship a maritime arms race centuries before the term existed. The result? A machine so perfectly adapted to its environment that even today, when historians try to recreate triremes using the same tools and materials, they can't quite match the originals. The Greeks didn't just build boats, they solved a puzzle written in waves and wind, and their solutions still ripple through time. Centuries before the triremes' sleek silhouette dominated naval warfare, Greek shipbuilding began with far humbler origins, crafts so different, they might as well belong to another world. Picture the Mycenaean ships of 1500 BCE, broad-beamed and sturdy, their hulls stitched together with ropes made from twisted papyrus or flax. These were the workhorses of the Bronze Age, designed to haul olive oil, pottery, and copper ingots across the Aegean rather than outmaneuver enemies. Their construction method, sewn plank, was ingenious for its time. Artisans drilled holes along the edges of wooden planks, lashing them together like a giant floating basket. But this technique had a fatal flaw. Every stitch was a weak point, vulnerable to rotting or snapping in stormy seas. The turning point came around 800 BCE, when Greek shipwrights stumbled upon a game-changing innovation, the mortise and tenon joint. Imagine two wooden planks meeting not with rope, but with a series of perfectly carved tabs and slots, locked together like pieces of an unshakable puzzle. This wasn't just an upgrade, it was a revolution. Suddenly, hulls could withstand the battering of waves without unraveling. The difference was stark. Sewn ships flexed dangerously under stress, while mortise and tenon vessels held their shape like a clenched fist. Archaeological finds, like the Marsala shipwreck off Sicily, reveal just how meticulous these joints were, some as tight as a 1/20th of an inch, a precision that would make modern carpenters pause. But why did this shift happen when it did? History offers clues. The collapse of the Mycenaean palaces around 1200 BCE plunged Greece into a dark age, severing trade routes and scattering knowledge. When shipbuilding re-emerged centuries later, it wasn't just a revival, it was a reinvention. The Phoenicians, master traders of the Mediterranean, likely influenced Greek designs, introducing sharper bows and deeper keels. Meanwhile, the legendary Trojan War, if Homer's accounts hold truth, may have exposed the limitations of older ships. Imagine hundreds of sewn plank vessels struggling to ferry warriors to Troy, their hulls groaning under the weight of armor and supplies. The need for something stronger became undeniable. By the time Persian invaders threatened Greece in the 5th century BCE, ship design had leaped forward again. The trireme's sleek profile and 3 banks of oars weren't just aesthetic choices, they were the culmination of centuries of trial and error. Earlier ships had relied on single sails or a single row of oarsmen, but the trireme harnessed the power of 170 rowers, its hull reinforced with those secretive hyposomata cables. What began as a humble cargo carrier had evolved into the ancient equivalent of a stealth destroyer. Yet the most fascinating detail, this evolution wasn't linear. Wrecks like the Trireme ship, a merchant vessel from 300 BCE, proved that older designs persisted alongside cutting-edge warships. Some ports clung to sewn plank methods for small fishing boats, while others experimented with hybrid techniques. It's a reminder that progress at sea, much like the waves themselves, rarely moves in straight lines. Each innovation, whether borrowed, invented, or stumbled upon, carved the path toward the trireme's legendary status. And behind every plank and joint lay not just engineering, but the pulse of a civilization adapting to the relentless demands of the sea. Homer's epics don't just spin tales of heroes and gods, they're time capsules, preserving whispers of Bronze Age shipbuilding that scholars still wrestle with today. When the Iliad describes Ajax's fleet as hollow ships, is that a technical detail or just poetic flair? The phrase alone sparks debate. Some argue it points to the distinctive crescent hulls of Minoan frescoes, those elegant, high-prowed vessels painted on palace walls at Akrotiri, their curves slicing through waves like knives. Others counter that hollow simply evokes the echoing space below decks, where rowers sweat and the creak of timbers filled the air. But here's what's tantalizing. Modern reconstructions based on Homer's descriptions, like the experimental vessel Argo, reveal these ships were far more than floating metaphors. Their shallow drafts let them beach effortlessly on Trojan shores, while their symmetrical designs pointed at both ends allowed them to reverse direction without turning, a feature later triremes would perfect. Then there's the Odyssey's infamous 20-oared ship, a phrase that's puzzled historians for generations. Was this a standard configuration, or just a narrative convenience? Compare it to the Minoan flotilla fresco from Thera, where vessels bristle with oars like centipedes' legs. The numbers don't quite match, but the principle does. These were warships built for speed, not bulk. Even Homer's casual details like Odysseus lashing masts with leather ropes align with archaeological finds. Excavations at Pylos uncovered seals depicting ships with exactly that feature, suggesting the poet wasn't just inventing, he was documenting. Yet contradictions linger. Homer's ships carry improbable loads. The Iliad mentions 50 men crammed into a single vessel, while wrecks like Ulubiran show Bronze Age traders prioritized cargo space over crew quarters. Could these inconsistencies hint at a deeper truth? Perhaps Homer fused memories of different eras, blending the sewn plank ships of his ancestors with the sleeker designs of his own time. Or consider the Pentaconter, a 50-oared galley later Greeks associated with the Trojan War. Its sheer size would have been unthinkable in the Mycenaean era, yet its DNA might trace back to those crescent-shaped Minoan precursors. The most compelling clue lies in the verbs Homer chooses. Ships don't just sail, they leap or dance across waves active, agile movements that mirror the fresco's dynamic curves. When archaeologists unearthed the Minoan harbor of Kamos, they found ship sheds designed for vessels matching those very proportions. It's as if art, poetry, and archaeology are fragments of the same shattered amphora, each piece revealing part of the picture. So were Homer's ships real? The answer might be both yes and no. They're echoes of a maritime past filtered through the needs of storytelling, half remembered and half reinvented. But in that tension between fact and fiction, we catch glimpses of the ships that shaped the Bronze Age, not just as tools of war or trade, but as vessels of imagination, carrying the legacy of the sea into myth. Athens didn't just build triremes, they perfected a killing machine. Imagine a vessel just 120 feet long, barely wider than a school bus, yet packing the punch of a naval destroyer. The secret: 3 stacked tiers of rowers, 62 on top, 54 in the middle, and 54 below, each pulling oars of different lengths to create a synchronized, piston-like rhythm. This wasn't just rowing, it was biomechanical precision. At full speed, a trireme could hit 9 knots faster than most sailing ships of the era, and with a shocking ability to accelerate from standstill to ramming speed in under 30 seconds. That bronze ram protruding from the bow wasn't for show. Weighing over 400 pounds and shaped like a predatory dolphin's snout, it could splinter enemy hulls with a single, well-aimed thrust. But raw power wasn't enough. What made the trireme truly terrifying was its agility. Unlike bulky cargo ships, its hull was built like a racing shell, lightweight cypress planks held together by those critical hyposomata cables, which acted like giant rubber bands, flexing to absorb wave impacts without breaking. The keel wasn't deep, it was almost flat, allowing the ship to pivot on a dime. Athenian crews trained for years to execute the deekplus, a maneuver where triremes would slip between enemy lines, then veer sharply to smash their rams sideways into vulnerable hulls. Think of it as ancient naval jiu-jitsu, using an opponent's momentum against them. Here's the twist: despite dominating Mediterranean warfare for 2 centuries, not a single complete trireme wreck has been discovered. Why? The answer lies in their very design. Triremes were built for speed, not durability. Their thin planks degraded fast in seawater, and when sunk, the bronze rams, often the only metal parts, were salvaged as prize trophies. The few fragments we have, like the athlete ram found off Israel's coast, tell a tantalizing story. Its alloy mix 90% copper, 10% tin wasn't just strong. It was deliberately brittle, designed to snap off inside enemy hulls like a bee's stinger, leaving the victim to flood while the attacker rode away. Modern reconstructions, like the Olympias built in 1987, reveal another layer of genius. Rowers weren't seated at random, they were arranged in a zigzag pattern, allowing oars to overlap without clashing. The noise must have been deafening. Creaking wood, shouted commands, and the rhythmic splash of 170 oars striking water in near-perfect unison. Yet this chaos was meticulously controlled. Rowers were the engine, and Athens treated them like elite athletes. They earned wages, ate protein-rich diets, and trained until their movements were instinctive. In battle, that discipline meant the difference between circling an opponent for the kill or being the one sinking beneath the waves. The trireme's legacy isn't just in battles won, it's in how it reshaped empires. Athens' fleet dominance funded the Parthenon, sustained democracy, and turned the Aegean into a Greek lake. But this supremacy came at a cost. Maintaining a trireme fleet bankrupted cities. Each ship cost a talent of silver, roughly 9 years' wages for a skilled laborer. And when Syracusia copied Athenian designs during the Sicilian expedition, the student surpassed the master, annihilating Athens' fleet in one disastrous battle. The trireme wasn't invincible, just unmatched until something better came along. Perhaps the greatest testament to its design is this: even with modern tools and centuries of naval knowledge, we still can't perfectly replicate their performance. The Olympias, despite decades of study, tops out at 7 knots too shy of ancient records. Were the Greeks hiding tricks in their timber joints? Did they know secrets about wave dynamics lost to time? Until we find that elusive wreck, the trireme remains history's most tantalizing naval ghost, a reminder that sometimes the past builds things even the present can't unravel. The Olympias cuts through the water with an almost eerie grace, its oars churning the waves in perfect unison, a sight not seen in over 2,000 years. This painstaking reconstruction, launched in 1987, wasn't just an academic exercise, it was a voyage into the unknown. Built using the same materials and techniques as ancient triremes, cypress planks, wooden pegs, and hand-forged bronze fittings, the ship became a floating laboratory. But when the first rowers took their seats, they quickly realized Hollywood had lied. These weren't benches for shackled slaves, they were precision stations for elite athletes. Rowing a trireme demanded more than brute strength. It required the endurance of a marathon runner and the coordination of a symphony. Sea trials revealed startling truths. Ancient accounts claimed triremes could hit 9 knots, a speed modern scholars initially dismissed as exaggeration. Yet when the Olympia's crew of volunteers, historians, athletes, and naval officers pushed to their limits, the ship nearly matched those ancient records. The secret, a stroke rate of 40 per minute, sustained for hours. Each rower burned over 600 calories an hour, their heart rates soaring to levels seen in Olympic rowers. This wasn't just labor, it was a sport. Athenian rowers were so valued, they earned citizenship and pensions, shattering the myth of slave-powered galleys. Then came the ramming tests, with the Olympias charging at full speed. Its bronze prow struck a mock enemy hull with terrifying force. The impact wasn't a blunt crash, it was a surgical strike. The ram's design, modeled after the athlete artifact, didn't just puncture, it sliced inward, widening the hole as the ship recoiled. Ancient accounts of one-stroke kills suddenly made sense. But the real surprise, the ship's ability to reverse instantly. Unlike modern vessels, the trireme's symmetrical hull and oar configuration allowed it to dart backward almost as fast as forward, a tactic used to devastating effect at Salamis, where Greek ships lured Persian fleets into shallow waters before spinning and ramming. Yet the Olympias also exposed gaps in our knowledge. Despite meticulous construction, modern crews couldn't quite replicate ancient speeds. Were the Greeks using a different rowing rhythm? Did they treat their timber with lost techniques to reduce drag? Even the ship's steering oars, massive, unwieldy things, proved harder to master than text suggested. And then there was the noise. With 170 oars creaking and splashing, Commands had to be shouted through a copper tube, a makeshift megaphone that barely cut through the din. How ancient crews coordinated in battle remains one of history's great puzzles. The Olympias' greatest lesson might be humility. For all our technology, we still can't fully match the ingenuity of those ancient shipwrights. Every time the replica sailed, it carried more than just passengers, it carried the ghost of a civilization that turned naval warfare into an art form. And somewhere beneath the waves, the secrets of the original triremes still wait, daring us to dive deeper. The Syracusia wasn't just a ship, it was a floating palace, a declaration of power so audacious it made even Rome's mighty fleets seem like rowboats. Commissioned by King Hiero II of Syracuse in the 3rd century BCE, and designed by none other than Archimedes, this colossus stretched nearly 400 feet from bow to stern, longer than a football field and dwarfing every vessel afloat at the time. Imagine a 3-tiered leviathan, its hull sheathed in lead to outwit shipworms, its decks studded with gardens where exotic plants swayed to the rhythm of the waves. Ancient writers like Athenaeus claimed it could carry 4,000 passengers, a figure so staggering that modern engineers still scratch their heads. Could wood and rope truly support such weight? Or was this the ancient equivalent of fishtails? Step aboard, and the extravagance defies belief. The top deck boasted a gymnasium lined with marble statues, where athletes trained under the Mediterranean sun. Below, a library housed rare scrolls in cedar cabinets, their scent mingling with the sea breeze. Banquet halls featured mosaic floors depicting scenes from the Iliad, the tiles so precisely laid they never loosened even in storms. But the Syracusia's piece de resistance, a temple dedicated to Aphrodite, complete with an altar of polished ivory. This wasn't just luxury, it was psychological warfare, a floating testament to Syracuse's wealth that left rival ports gaping. Then there were the innovations. Archimedes, ever the genius, reportedly installed the first naval catapult on its decks, a torsion-powered monster capable of hurling 300-pound stones at enemy shores. Some accounts even mention a primitive elevator system, possibly powered by pulleys to hoist cargo between decks. But the most tantalizing detail lies in its stability. Hiero allegedly demanded the ship could carry a full load of grain without listing, so Archimedes engineered a system of counterweights and ballast tanks, precursors to modern ship stabilizers. Skeptics, though, have done the math. Modern hydrostatic calculations suggest a wooden hull of that size could safely carry perhaps 2,000 passengers, half the ancient claim. So was the Syracusia's capacity exaggerated? Not necessarily. Ancient engineers had tricks we've since forgotten. The hull may have used lightweight cedar for upper decks, while denser oak below provided strength. And those lead sheaths, more than just anti-worm armor, they added crucial weight low in the hull, lowering the center of gravity. The ship's fate is as shrouded as its origins. After a single voyage to Alexandria as a gift to Ptolemy III, it vanishes from history. Some say it rotted in port, others whisper it was dismantled for materials. But its legacy lingers in the questions it forces us to ask. How much of ancient engineering brilliance have we underestimated? And if a single city-state could build such a marvel 2,000 years ago, what other secrets might the sea still hide? The Syracusia challenges us to rethink the limits of antiquity not as a time of crude tools, but of towering imagination. Modern shipwrights would gasp at the Greeks' boldest secret. Their ships thrived on fresh-cut, unseasoned timber. While today's builders kiln dry wood to prevent warping, ancient shipyards buzzed with the scent of sap and resin, crafting hulls from planks so green they practically oozed moisture. This wasn't carelessness, it was chemistry. Green wood's natural flexibility allowed artisans to bend planks into the trireme's signature curves using nothing but fire and brute force. Once soaked in seawater, the fibers swelled into a watertight seal, tighter than any caulk. But the real genius lay in timing. These ships were built in winter, when felled timber held the most moisture, then launched by spring, just as the wood began drying, locking its shape like a snapshot of the builder's intent. The process defied logic. Instead of starting with a skeleton, Greeks built their ships shell first, assembling plank upon plank like a wooden jigsaw before adding ribs. Imagine stitching a shoe's leather upper before inserting the sole. The Antikythera shipwreck, discovered off Crete in 1901, shattered assumptions when divers found whole sections preserved like marine fossils. Here, mortise and tenon joints locked planks edge to edge without a single nail, their precision so exact that even after 2 millennia, some gaps measured less than a millimeter. These weren't crude barges, they were masterclasses in tension and compression, each plank carved with subtle bevels to create hydrodynamic curves modern software struggles to replicate. Why gamble on such unorthodox methods? The sea held the answer. Salt water acted as a natural preservative, preventing rot while the woods retained sap-repelled borers. And unlike kiln-dried timber, which could crack under the Mediterranean's relentless sun, green wood adapted. Seasonal expansion and contraction kept joints snug, a self-healing system no dry dock could match. Even repairs played to nature's strengths. Damaged planks were replaced with equally fresh wood, ensuring uniform flexibility. The Antikythera wreck revealed another twist. Shipwrights mixed species like a pharmacist's formula. Lighter fir for upper decks resisted splintering from projectiles, while dense oak near the waterline shrugged off waves. Pine, rich in resin, lined areas prone to leaks. This wasn't random selection. It was material science avant la lettre. Modern reconstructions proved the Greeks' gamble worked. When the Olympias replica was built using seasoned timber, its hull required constant caulking. The ancients, it seems, had turned a flaw into their greatest asset. Their ships didn't just survive the sea, they collaborated with it, bending nature's rules to sail farther, fight harder, and leave us wondering what other mistakes held hidden genius. Corinth's shipyards hummed with something dangerous in 700 BCE, not just sawdust and sweat, but revolution. Behind guarded docks, craftsmen unveiled the Decode, a warship so radical it would spark history's first naval arms race. Picture this, a vessel twice as deadly as anything before, with 2 stacked banks of oars instead of 1. Overnight, Corinth's fleet could outpace and outmaneuver rivals, its rowers driving the hull forward with a force that single-level galleys couldn't match. The Decode wasn't just an upgrade, it was a declaration. Neighboring city-states took one look and realized the rules of power had changed. Sparta's response was pure iron. While Corinth chased speed, the Spartans armored their ships like hoplites, reinforcing hulls with extra bracing and thicker planks. Their biremes traded agility for brute resilience, designed to survive ramming attacks that would splinter lighter vessels. Archaeologists found traces of this philosophy in the wrecks off Pylos crossbeams, so stout they resemble fortress gates. But Athens took the opposite path. Their shipwrights obsessed over weight savings, shaving planks to the thickness of a thumb and experimenting with imported larch wood, which was lighter than local pine. The result, ships that could dart like dragonflies, circling slower opponents before striking. The rivalry escalated with each passing decade. By 500 BCE, Corinth introduced the first trireme, a Decode with a 3rd tier of oars, only for Athens to refine it into something sleeker. Meanwhile, Aegean, the island kingdom, developed a hybrid design, a bireme with a deeper hull for rougher seas, perfect for intercepting merchant ships in the storm-prone Adriatic. This wasn't just competition, it was evolution by adrenaline. Shipbuilders became state secrets, and espionage flourished. Herodotus recounts how Athenian spies disguised as merchants slipped into Corinthian shipyards, measuring hull curves with knotted ropes. The tech race reshaped Mediterranean politics. Naval supremacy decided which city-states could control trade routes, levy taxes on shipping, or threaten rivals with blockades. When Persia invaded Greece in 480 BCE, it wasn't just soldiers who turned the tide, it was ships. The triremes' speed allowed Athens to outflank the Persian fleet at Salamis, while Sparta's sturdier vessels held the line. Centuries later, Rome would borrow these innovations, layering them into their own warships. But the lesson was clear. In the ancient world, Mastery of the waves began not with empires, but with the cunning of rival craftsmen, each racing to build something the sea had never seen. Beneath the quiet waves off Salamis lies a graveyard of history, a secret so well preserved, it's as if time itself paused. In 2022, sonar pulses slicing through the murk revealed shadows that made archaeologists catch their breath. The unmistakable outlines of shipwrecks, dozens of them, buried in layers of anoxic mud. This isn't just any seabed, it's nature's perfect archive. The same oxygen-starved sludge that protected the famed Vasa warship for centuries has likely cradled these wrecks untouched, their wooden hulls and bronze arms shielded from decay. Somewhere in that darkness, the ghosts of the Persian and Greek fleets wait, their stories locked in silt. But why here? The answer lies in the battle's brutal choreography. Salamis wasn't an open sea clash. It was a trap sprung in narrow straits, where triremes collided with such force that survivors rode of the water, boiling with splinters. When ships sank, they didn't plummet to abyssal depths, they settled into shallow basins, swiftly smothered by sediments rushing from nearby rivers. Those sediments, rich in organic matter, devoured oxygen, creating a sterile zone where even shipworms could gnaw. The result, a time capsule. Divers probing the edges of the site have already found fragments, a corroded helmet here, a shattered oar loom there hinting at the trove beneath. What thrills researchers most is the potential for intact rams. Most recovered rams, like the Athlet, were salvaged after battles prized as trophies. But at Salamis, the sheer chaos suggests some may still be lodged in enemy hulls, frozen mid-strike. Finding one in situ could reveal unprecedented details, the angle of impact, the speed of collision, even the crew's last maneuvers. And then there's the Holy Grail, an officer's cabin. Trireme commanders didn't just fight, they lived aboard for months. Personal artifacts, a wax tablet with battle orders, a lyre string snapped mid-tune, could rewrite our understanding of naval hierarchy. Was command centralized, or did rowers have autonomy? Did Persian and Greek ships share design quirks we've missed? The mud might hold darker clues too. Human remains, though rare in marine archaeology, could survive in these conditions. A single skeleton, its bones arranged in the crouch of a rower or the stance of an archer, would tell us who these sailors really were: mercenaries, citizens, or enslaved fighters. And there's the tantalizing possibility of inscriptions. The Greeks and Persians both marked ships with paint or carvings. Even a fragment could confirm long-debated names of vessels or captains. Yet Salamis guards its secrets fiercely. The same silt that preserves also conceals, requiring technology like sub-bottom profilers to map what lies beneath without disturbing it. Every scan is a gamble, one wrong move, and a ram's precise position, or the context of a shattered amphora, could be lost forever. This isn't just archaeology, it's high-stakes forensics, where each clue reconstructs a day that changed history. And with hundreds of wrecks potentially waiting, the story of Salamis isn't over. It's been lying in the dark, waiting for us to listen. While triremes stole the spotlight in ancient art and epics, Greece's survival hinged on a far humbler hero, the round-hulled merchant vessel, chugging across the Aegean under the weight of 1,000 clay jars. These weren't the sleek predators of naval warfare. They were the dump trucks of antiquity, their bellies swollen with grain from Egypt, wine from Crete, and olive oil bound for every corner of the Mediterranean. The Ionissos wreck, discovered off the coast of Greece in 1992, offers a rare window into their world. Nestled under 30 meters of water lay a ship so perfectly preserved, archaeologists could trace the curve of its hull like the ribs of a sleeping whale, broad, rounded, and built for capacity, not speed. Stacked in its hold were over 1,000 amphorae, each one still cradling traces of its last cargo: almonds, figs, and the resin used to waterproof the jars. Here's the puzzle: if these ships were the lifeblood of Greek cities, why do they vanish from the historical record? Walk through any museum's ancient collection, and you'll see vase after vase glorifying triremes, their rams gleaming, oars poised like spears. Yet merchant vessels appear as afterthoughts, if at all. The answer might lie in the politics of memory. Warships carried heroes, merchantmen carried lunch. States celebrated what fueled their power, not their pantry. But the Ilonisos wreck flips that narrative. Its design reveals engineering brilliance tailored to an unglamorous truth. Stability mattered more than speed. Unlike the Trireme's knife-edge hull, this ship's rounded bottom resisted capsizing even when crammed with cargo, and those amphorae, their egg-like shapes weren't just tradition. They stacked like puzzle pieces, their pointed bases slotting into the gaps of the layer below, creating a self-bracing cargo net of clay. The real shock is how little changed over centuries. Modern sonar scans show merchant wrecks from the Bronze Age to Byzantium sharing the same stubby silhouette, proof that when something worked, the Greeks stuck with it. Yet these ships faced dangers no trireme feared. Without rams or marines, they relied on sheer anonymity to dodge pirates. Their logs, if they kept any, dissolved with their wood, leaving historians to piece together routes from scattered amphora stamps and storm-driven wreck sites. And then there's the silent testimony of the Ilonisos itself. When divers pried open one jar, they found not almonds, but a cluster of lead ingots hidden contraband, perhaps, or a captain's private stash. So why the artistic blackout? Maybe it's because survival rarely makes good drama. Or perhaps the answer is simpler. The Greeks painted what they aspired to be: heroes, conquerors, gods of the sea, not what they actually needed. But in the quiet dark off Ilonisos, the truth still sits, waiting. For every warship that prowled the Aegean, a dozen humble traders kept the civilization afloat. Their stories sealed not in poetry, but in resin-soaked clay and the quiet math of profit and loss. Every 4 years, Athens transformed its grandest warship into something far stranger, a floating cathedral draped in saffron robes. The Panathenaic festival's ceremonial trireme wasn't just transport. It was a divine courier, tasked with carrying Athena's sacred peplos, a hand-woven robe, from the Piraeus harbor to the Acropolis. Picture the scene: rowers replaced by priests, the ram's deadly point sheathed in gold leaf, and the mast rigged not with sails but with the billowing fabric of the goddess's new garment. This wasn't merely pageantry, it was theology in motion. Ancient texts describe the ship's slow procession through Athens, crowds parting as if the vessel itself had become an extension of Athena's power. Archaeologists found traces of this ritual in the city's topography: a wide road, the ship route, leading from the docks to the Parthenon, its curvature mirroring the path a trireme's hull would take if dragged ashore. Yet the mysteries deepen when we turn to Delphi's votive offerings. Excavations at Apollo's sanctuary unearthed dozens of miniature ship models, some no larger than a hand, others stretching 3 feet, left as offerings by grateful sailors. These aren't toys, they're coded messages. The proportions of a 6th century BCE model match the sleek lines of a pentaconter, but with one eerie addition: a serpent's head curling from the prow. Could this be a nod to the mythological Argo, whose talking figurehead warned Jason of danger? The connection grows stronger when examining similar votives from Samothrace's sanctuary of the great gods. Here, ships are depicted with dual prows, a feature described in Argonaut legends, allowing vessels to reverse direction without turning, as if guided by divine hands. Was the Argo more than myth? A clue may lie in Herodotus' account of the Selonian ship, a sacred vessel Athens maintained for centuries to reenact Theseus' voyage to Crete. Its hull was repaired plank by plank over generations, a practice echoing the philosophical ship of Theseus paradox: if every part is replaced, does it remain the same ship? The Greeks seem to think so, treating these vessels as living bridges to their gods. Perhaps the Argo's legend began the same way: a real sacred ship, its exploits magnified over time. The most tantalizing evidence comes from a ship shed discovered near Corinth's ancient harbor. Unlike military docks, this structure held a single vessel, its floor littered with charred remnants of ritual sacrifices. The timbers bear unusual carvings, not builders' marks, but prayers etched into the wood. If cities maintained divine ships for centuries, might their designs have influenced heroic tales? When poets sang of the Argo sailing through clashing rocks or navigating by celestial signs, were they embellishing the feats of actual sacred vessels, their crews believed to sail under the literal gaze of the gods? What emerges isn't just a blurring of myth and history, but a revelation about how the Greeks saw their world. To them, the sea wasn't just water, it was a sacred highway, and ships weren't mere tools, but vessels of communion. Whether carrying Athena's robe or Theseus' legacy, these boats straddled realms, their timbers soaked in as much devotion as brine. The waves may have erased their keel marks, but in temple offerings and festival rites, their ghostly outlines remain, waiting for us to decipher their cargo of faith. Alexander's conquest stretched from Greece to India, but his most overlooked weapons weren't just his phalanxes, they floated. Hidden in the dusty annals of history lies the story of an 800-ship armada, a fleet so vast it dwarfed even Persia's navy at its peak. This wasn't just a collection of boats, it was a floating supply chain, siege engine, and diplomatic tool rolled into one. Recent excavations in Phoenicia's ancient ports have cracked open this mystery, revealing dry docks that tell a tale of forced innovation. Here, Macedonian engineers and Phoenician shipwrights, bitter rivals just years earlier, were suddenly elbow-deep in sawdust, blending Greek trireme designs with Eastern hull shapes to create hybrids the Mediterranean had never seen. The evidence is etched into the stone slips, grooves too wide for pure Greek ships, yet too shallow for traditional Phoenician traders. But the real puzzle begins where Alexander's maps end, on the banks of the Indus River. When his army reached India's labyrinth of waterways in 326 BCE, they faced a dilemma. Their Mediterranean ships, built for salty waves and predictable currents, were useless against monsoons and shifting sandbars. Ancient texts mention a frantic scramble to build new vessels, but were these desperate copies of Greek designs or collaborations with local boatwrights? A clue washed up in 2019, when archaeologists in Pakistan uncovered timber fragments near the ancient site of Bucephala. The wood was Himalayan cedar, a material Greeks never used, yet the joints showed telltale mortise and tenon patterns, a signature Mediterranean technique. Even stranger, some planks were sewn together with coconut fiber, a method straight from Indian shipbuilding manuals. The fleet's composition reveals Alexander's genius for adaptation. Primary sources describe horse transports with drop-down ramps for cavalry raids, hospital ships staffed with Greek physicians, and even floating siege towers that could be dismantled and carried overland. One account from Plutarch mentions a mobile diplomatic barge draped in purple sails, where Alexander received local rulers beneath a gilded canopy. This wasn't just a navy, it was a propaganda machine on water, dazzling subjects from the Nile to the Ganges. Yet the fleet's ultimate fate reads like a tragic epilogue. After Alexander's death, his successors cannibalized the ships for their precious metals and timber, scattering their legacy across a dozen wars. The Indus vessels likely rotted where they were moored, their hybrid designs forgotten until modern dredging machines churned up their bones. What remains is a testament to history's greatest melting pot, a fleet where Macedonian ambition met Phoenician craftsmanship and Indian ingenuity, only to vanish beneath the silt of time. But in those few years, Alexander proved ships could conquer more than waves. They could bridge worlds. The recovered bronze rams tell a story that shatters long-held assumptions. When the Athlet ram was pulled from Israeli waters in 1980, metallurgists expected to find standard naval bronze, a simple mix of copper and tin. Instead, spectroscopy revealed a cocktail of elements deliberately chosen for their hidden properties. The core alloy matched historical recipes around 90% copper, 10% tin, but trace amounts of lead and arsenic lurked beneath the surface. These weren't impurities, they were additives with a purpose. Lead made the metal slightly softer, allowing the ram to deform on impact rather than shatter. Arsenic, though toxic to handle, strengthened the alloy's crystalline structure, preventing cracks from spreading. This wasn't just metalwork, It was ancient materials science at its finest. Recent impact tests with reconstructed rams yielded even bigger surprises. High-speed footage showed the ram's hollow, beak design wasn't just for weight savings. It functioned like a crumple zone, absorbing kinetic energy to protect the attacking ship's hull. But the real revelation came when researchers targeted different parts of a mock enemy vessel. Striking the hull dead-on did catastrophic damage, as expected. Yet when the ram grazed a ship's steering oar at a shallow angle, the results were startling. The bronze beak sheared through the oar's wooden shaft like a scalpel, leaving the victim adrift but afloat. Ancient accounts of battles suddenly made new sense. Thucydides describes fleets disabled rather than sunk during skirmishes, while pottery fragments from Corinth show triremes with intact hulls but missing rudders. Could naval combat have been more about control than destruction? A fragmentary text from the Athenian archives, long dismissed as a scribe's error, mentions rewards for captains who return with prizes rather than wrecks. The math supports this. Sinking an enemy ship meant losing its cargo and potential ransom value. Disabling it preserved both. Even the ram's shape hints at this duality. Dolphins, the inspiration for many rams' designs, were seen by Greeks as playful guides of sailors, not just predators. Perhaps the ultimate goal wasn't to send foes to the depths, but to steer them toward surrender, a nuanced dance of dominance and restraint, cast in bronze and lost beneath the waves. We picture Greek warships surging forward under the power of oars alone, but the truth is far more nuanced. Sails were not just for merchant vessels, they played a crucial, often overlooked role even in naval combat. Historians long assumed triremes stowed their masts and sails before battle, relying solely on oars for maneuverability. Yet recent analysis of vase paintings and temple reliefs tells a different story. At least a dozen depictions show warships with sails raised during engagements, their rigging taut as they cut through choppy waters. The famous Lenormant relief from the Acropolis even captures a trireme mid-battle, its square sail billowing while rowers strain at their benches. This wasn't artistic license, it was standard practice. Ancient logistics support this view. The Athenian naval logs from 425 BCE, preserved on crumbling papyrus, list sails among battle-ready supplies. One damaged fragment specifies 3 spare linen sails allocated to a single trireme squadron. If sails were merely auxiliary, why stockpile them in war zones? The answer lies in energy efficiency. Modern reconstructions prove that under favorable winds, a trireme under sail could maintain 5 knots with just 10 men managing the rigging compared to 170 rowers exhausting themselves to achieve 7. In prolonged chases or strategic retreats, sails weren't just convenient, they were game changers. Then there's the mystery of the lizard skin sails mentioned in Aeschylus' surviving fragments. Most translators dismiss this as poetic metaphor, but maritime historians propose a radical reinterpretation. Could lizard skin describe early reinforced canvas? Experiments with layered linen treated with beeswax and resin materials, Greeks had in abundance produced remarkably durable sails resistant to tearing. When replicators tested these reinforced sheets on the Olympias, they withstood winds that shredded conventional linen. Even more telling, Egyptian tomb paintings from the same era depict sails with quilted patterning, suggesting Mediterranean-wide experimentation with strengthened rigging. The debate isn't just academic, it reshapes our understanding of naval tactics. Sails allowed for deceptive maneuvers, like feigning retreat only to pivot downwind for a ramming strike. Thucydides describes the Corinthian fleet using false flight tactics at Aegian in 413 BCE, luring Athenian ships into wind shadows where they became sitting ducks. Without sails, such feints would drain rowers' stamina irrecoverably, and in the chaos of Salamis, where currents and gusts swirled unpredictably, commanders likely exploited every advantage: oars for precision, sails for endurance. Energy calculations reveal another layer. Rowers burned through 6,000 calories daily, requiring fleets to carry absurd quantities of barley, cheese, and onions. Sails slashed these logistical nightmares. A trireme traveling from Piraeus to Rhodes under mixed propulsion, sails by day, oars at dawn for surprise attacks, could cut rations by 40%. No wonder Athens' naval manuals emphasized sail handling alongside rowing drills. The idea of oar-only warfare crumbles under scrutiny, revealing a hybrid approach as sophisticated as the trireme's hull design. The Greeks didn't choose between sail and oar, they mastered both, bending wind and muscle to the same unstoppable purpose. The bustling shipyards of Piraeus held a secret in plain sight. Amid the sawdust and the shouts of overseers, women shaped the very backbone of Athenian sea power. For centuries, historians assumed ancient Greek shipbuilding was an exclusively male domain. But a series of graffiti-covered workshop walls discovered in 2016 painted a radically different picture. These crude etchings, long dismissed as idle doodles, included ship diagrams signed with feminine names Sophia, etched beside a meticulously drawn trireme hull. Irens marked near calculations for oar angles. Even more telling were the tools found nearby. Smaller adzes and chisels with wear patterns matching women's grip strength, buried beneath layers of shipyard debris. This wasn't token assistance. These were skilled craftswomen contributing to Athens' naval supremacy, their roles erased by time rather than antiquity itself. The Mediterranean's most notorious captain shattered gender norms entirely. Artemisia of Caria didn't just sail Greek-style ships, she commanded them in history's defining naval battle. When Persia's Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BCE, this warrior queen arrived with a squadron of triremes crewed entirely by her subjects, their hulls modeled after Athens' finest. Ancient accounts marveled at her tactical brilliance at Salamis, where she allegedly fooled both Greek and Persian fleets by flying changing flags, slipping through chaos unharmed. Herodotus, rarely kind to women in martial roles, grudgingly admitted Xerxes valued her counsel above his male generals, proclaiming, "My men have become women, and my women men." The ultimate insult to Athenian masculinity. Her ships outperformed theirs in maneuverability drills, according to recovered Persian training logs, but Artemisia's legacy runs deeper than battles. Recent analysis of Halicarnassus dry docks, her home port, reveals ship designs blending Greek and Egyptian features, suggesting her engineers adapted trireme technology with innovations from across her multicultural realm. A recovered payroll tablet lists payments to female carpenters for keel work, while pottery fragments show women supervising hull caulking. This was an anomaly, it was systemic. The myth of exclusive male dominion over shipbuilding crumbles under such evidence, revealing a more nuanced truth where necessity and skill trumped rigid gender roles. Perhaps the most poignant clue comes from a child's wooden toy, a miniature trireme found in Piraeus' residential quarter. Carved into its base were the words, "Mother made this." Whether as artisans, strategists, or innovators, women shaped the vessels that shaped history, their stories waiting like barnacles on sunken hulls, silent until someone thinks to look. Greek sailors didn't just hug the coastline, they danced across open oceans guided by nature's own navigation system. Picture a moonless night in the 4th century BCE, waves lapping against the hull as a pilot from Massalia crouches on deck, holding up a peculiar bronze device shaped like a backward L. This was the Syapod, the shadow foot, a tool so simple yet so effective it could measure a ship's latitude using nothing but the angle of the sun. Pytheas, the legendary explorer who ventured beyond the Arctic Circle, described its use in logs later mocked by landlocked scholars. But modern replicas prove its genius. When aligned with the horizon at noon, the Syapod's gnomon cast shadows corresponding to specific ports from Rhodes to Carthage. No compass, no sextant, just geometry and sunlight whispering directions across the waves. Birds became living compasses for these ancient wayfarers. Observing a cormorant's flight path at dawn wasn't mere superstition, it was science. Migratory birds like shearwaters follow predictable routes between feeding grounds, their V formations pointing toward islands invisible over the horizon. Greek pilots kept detailed logs of these avian signposts, records later codified in the Ornithologia Nautica, a lost manual cited by Roman admirals. The patterns held truth. When the crew of the Trireme ship wrecked off Cyprus in 300 BCE, their final cargo included cages for quails, not as food but as navigational aids. Release a quail at sea, and its frantic flight toward land revealed the nearest coastline's direction. Wave reading elevated navigation to an art form. Experienced pilots could distinguish the deep swell of open ocean long, rolling waves uninterrupted for miles from the choppy, coastal confusion where currents collided with headlands. The difference meant life or death when fog swallowed all landmarks. A 5th century BCE wreck near Crete held a captain's slate with wave diagrams scratched onto its surface, showing how pilots tracked subtle variations in wave intervals to estimate distance from shore. Even phytoplankton played its part. Certain algae blooms tinted patches of sea milky white, markers that correlated with underwater ridges, natural highways leading to known ports. The proof of their open sea prowess lies in the impossibly straight routes between distant ports. Analysis of amphora stamps shows identical wine jars appearing in Egypt and the Black Sea within the same harvest season, a journey requiring direct crossings of the Mediterranean's deepest basins. How? By riding the Thalassian streams. Subsurface currents Greek pilots mapped through trial and terror. One account from a lost Ptolemaic text describes sailors dropping weighted lines coated in sheep fat to sample currents at different depths, their viscosity revealing flow directions invisible from the surface. What emerges isn't the fumbling coastal hopping of textbook cliches, but a network of oceanic flyways as precise as modern shipping lanes. These sailors didn't just conquer the sea, they conversed with it, deciphering a language written in star paths, bird wings, and the shimmer of disturbed water. Their charts may have crumbled to dust, but their legacy lingers in every vessel that dares trust nature's signs over satellite beeps. The sea guarded its secrets, but never from those who knew how to ask. Archimedes' legendary mirror weapon sounds like something ripped from a myth, sunlight harnessed as a naval flamethrower to incinerate Roman ships during the siege of Syracuse. Ancient chroniclers like Lucian and Galen spun vivid accounts of bronze reflectors focusing the sun's rays into a deadly beam, setting enemy sails ablaze from the harbor walls. But could a 3rd century BCE scientist really have engineered such a feat? Or has history blurred the line between genius and fantasy? Modern experiments reveal a puzzle far more complex than the legends suggest. In 1973, Greek engineer Ioannis Sakis staged the most famous test off the coast of Skaramagas. Using 70 polished copper mirrors, each the size of a dinner plate, he focused sunlight onto a plywood replica of a Roman galley 70 meters away. Within minutes, smoke curled from the target, proof that the concept worked, at least under ideal conditions. But skeptics pounced on the caveats. Sakis' team had stationary targets, windless skies, and hours to adjust angles, luxuries a besieged Syracuse wouldn't have enjoyed. When the Massachusetts Institute of Technology attempted a scaled-down version in 2005, their success hinged on a crucial factor most historians overlook. The Roman ships would have been coated in pitch, a flammable tar used for waterproofing. Without it, even concentrated sunlight struggled to ignite dry wood swiftly enough to matter in battle. Yet dismissing the mirrors outright ignores Syracuse's technological climate. Archimedes had already devised the screw pump and compound pulleys. Why not optical warfare? The key might lie in misinterpretation. Recent studies of recovered Syracusan naval artifacts reveal a tantalizing alternative. What if the mirrors were actually polished bronze rams? These protruding weapons, gleaming like mirrors after fresh cleaning, could have served dual purposes. Inscriptions from the siege describe blinding flashes from the harbor, consistent with sunlight reflecting off angled rams to disorient approaching rowers. Even more compelling, signal mirrors were a well-documented tool in Greek naval communication. A coordinated fleet could have used polished surfaces to relay messages or simulate the appearance of floating fire, sowing panic without a single flame. The most plausible scenario blends both theories. Archimedes, ever the pragmatist, likely orchestrated a psychological warfare campaign leveraging light itself. Polished shields along the battlements, glinting rams below, each contributing to an optical illusion of supernatural power. Roman sailors, already wary of Syracuse's reputation for mechanical terrors, might have mistaken reflected glare for divine wrath. By the time Plutarch recorded the events centuries later, hyperbole could have cemented the myth. What endures isn't just a debate about mirrors, but a testament to Archimedes' real weapon, reputation. Whether through flames or fright, his ingenuity turned sunlight into a siege breaker, proving that sometimes, the most effective arms are those that live in the enemy's mind long before they strike. Syracuse's harbor in 413 BCE wasn't just a battleground, it was a slaughterhouse of wood and salt water, where nature conspired with Athenian enemies to annihilate what was once the Mediterranean's most formidable fleet. That summer, nearly 200 triremes, the pride of Athens' naval supremacy, met their end not by Persian rams or Spartan steel, but by a force even the Greeks couldn't outmaneuver, the harbor's hidden hydrology. Modern oceanographers mapping the seafloor have uncovered the brutal physics behind this disaster. Syracuse's harbor mouth funnels water like an hourglass, with underwater ridges creating violent crosscurrents during tidal shifts. When Athenian ships crowded the narrows, attempting a desperate breakout, they hit a phenomenon sailors now call the whirlpool effect, a churn of conflicting currents that dragged oars out of sync, spun hulls broadside, and dashed them against hidden reefs. The wreckage was so dense, archaeologists still pull Athenian helmet fragments from the sediment today. But the real killer wasn't just water, it was wind. Analysis of ancient pollen samples and sediment layers reveals an anomaly. That summer coincided with one of the Mediterranean's rare, double monsoon events, where Saharan siroccoes clashed with northern gales. Athenian triremes, designed for the Aegean's predictable meltemi winds, found themselves trapped between gusts that ripped sails to shreds and headwinds that negated rowers' efforts. Maritime historians recently cross-referenced Thucydides' battle accounts with climate reconstructions, noting how Athenian commanders repeatedly described sails filling backward, a meteorological impossibility under normal conditions, but plausible if 100-kilometer-per-hour gusts were ricocheting off the harbor's limestone cliffs. The cruelest twist lies in the strait itself. Sonar scans completed in 2021 identified a submerged ledge just east of the harbor, invisible from the surface but deadly to deep-drafted ships. Dubbed the ship trap by researchers, this ledge creates a hydraulic jump, a sudden elevation change that forces incoming waves to double in height. Any vessel caught atop it during an ebb tide would be lifted violently, then dropped onto razor-sharp coral heads. The evidence is etched into the wrecks. Dozens of hulls found clustered in this zone show identical damage patterns, gaping holes punched upward through their keels, as if the sea itself had reached up to gut them. Yet the disaster's deepest lesson isn't about naval design, it's about human overconfidence. Athens' admirals ignored local pilots' warnings, dismissing Syracuse's waters as just another harbor. They failed to account for what modern sailors call lee shores and coastlines where wind pushes ships toward land, leaving no room for error. The trireme's agility, so lethal in open water, became its downfall in these confined spaces. With no room to execute their famed deekless maneuvers, the ships piled up like toy boats in a storm drain. The wreck sites tell a final, haunting story. Excavated amphorae from sunken Athenian supply ships contain not just wine or grain, but hastily packed personal effects, a soldier's dice, a surgeon's bronze scalpel, a child's wooden doll. These weren't the orderly remains of a retreat. They were the debris of panic, of men who realized too late that Poseidon's fury could outmatch even Athena's wisdom. Today, as divers trace the outlines of those shattered hulls, they're not just mapping a graveyard, they're reading a cautionary tale written in timber and tide, one that whispers how easily the sea can humble even the mightiest fleets. Rome's naval dominance didn't spring from innovation, it was borrowed brilliance. After conquering Greece in 146 BCE, the Romans did something unexpected. They dismantled their clunky, flat-bottomed ships and replicated the sleek Greek trireme almost bolt for bolt. Walk through the Naples Archaeological Museum today, and the evidence is striking. Roman warship rams from the First Punic War are near-perfect copies of Greek designs, down to the dolphin-like curves and alloy ratios. But there's one glaring difference: a massive, spiked gangplank called the corvus, hinged to the deck like a drawbridge from hell. This wasn't just an add-on, it revealed Rome's entire naval philosophy. Where Greek triremes danced around enemies, ramming and retreating, Roman captains wanted to turn sea battles into land fights. The corvus, when dropped onto an enemy deck, locked ships together, allowing legionnaires to swarm across like ants on a stick. Modern recreations show the terrifying efficiency: a 10-ton plank slamming down with enough force to punch through decking, its iron spike anchoring ships in a deadly embrace. Yet the adaptations went deeper than boarding tactics. Roman shipwrights faced a logistical nightmare their Greek predecessors never imagined: transporting thousands of armored troops across open water. The solution: they stretched the trireme's hull into the quinquereme, a heavier vessel with 5 staggered rowers per vertical section instead of 3. Side by side, 3D models reveal the genius. Where Greek ships were racehorses, Roman versions were draft horses, broader in the beam to carry marines and siege engines. The hulls still bore the signature mortise and tenon joints, but with a twist. Roman builders packed the seams with wool soaked in pitch, creating a waterproof seal that outlasted Greek methods. The real surprise lies in the oar systems. Greek triremes relied on a single rower per oar, their rhythm precise as a metronome. Roman quinqueremes, by contrast, stacked multiple men on single oars, sometimes 2 or 3 pulling in unison. Experiments with the reconstructed Liburna in Croatia proved this wasn't just about brute force. The multi-man configuration allowed for rapid acceleration bursts, crucial when maneuvering under missile fire. But it came at a cost. Recovered Roman wrecks show excessive wear on oar ports, evidence of the constant strain from uneven rowing. Perhaps the most telling artifact sits in the Museo Archeologico dei Campi Flegrei, a bronze ram labeled Says 304, recovered near Sicily. Spectrographic analysis shows its tin content is 5% higher than Greek counterparts, making it harder but more brittle. Why? Because Roman naval doctrine valued initial impact over repeated strikes. Where Greek rams were designed to withdraw and strike again, Roman ships aimed for one decisive collision, then boarding. Even their sails told a story: wider and shorter than Greek models, optimized for quick deployment when the corvus needed stability. The legacy of this copying wasn't just military, it was cultural. Roman poets like Virgil waxed lyrical about graceful Greek hulls, while senators grudgingly admitted their navy's backbone was Hellenic in spirit. Yet in that tension between imitation and adaptation, Rome achieved what Greece never could: a fleet that didn't just dominate battles, but sustained an empire across 3 continents. The trireme's DNA lived on, not as a relic, but as the foundation for something far grander: proof that sometimes conquest isn't about inventing, but inheriting wisely. The Ulubiran shipwreck lies off Turkey's southern coast like a time capsule from a forgotten world, its cedar planks and cargo of ivory, tin, and cobalt blue glass whispering secrets that append conventional timelines. Discovered in 1982 by a sponge diver, this 3,300-year-old wreck doesn't fit neatly into any known maritime tradition. But here's what's provocative: beneath its Canaanite cargo and Cypriot pottery, the hull's construction echoes techniques later perfected by Greek shipwrights centuries afterward. The mortise and tenon joints binding its planks aren't just similar to classical Greek methods, they're nearly identical, down to the subtle beveling of the edges. This wasn't just shared technology, it was a blueprint passed hand to hand across generations, suggesting Greek maritime roots stretching far deeper than historians once dared to imagine. Take the anchors. Uluburan's stone anchors, with their precisely drilled holes and tapered tops, mirror those found in early Greek harbor sites like Kalamianos. Even the lashing patterns, fibers threaded through grooves to secure the stones, reappear in later Greek artifacts. But here's the twist. Uluburan sank around 1300 BCE, centuries before mainland Greece's so-called Dark Age, when maritime activity was thought to be minimal. If this ship carried Greek builders' signatures, it forces a radical rewrite. Were Mycenaean or even pre-Mycenaean sailors already plying these routes during the Bronze Age's peak, their techniques spreading through clandestine apprenticeships or captured craftsmen? The cargo list deepens the mystery. Among Uluburan's treasures were 10 tons of copper ingots, enough to arm a small army, and resin-soaked logs of cedar, a material Greeks would later prize for shipbuilding. But it's the tin that's telling. Isotopic analysis traced it to mines in Afghanistan, yet the ship's final moments place it near a stretch of Anatolian coast where Greek colonies would later flourish. This wasn't random drift. It hints at a network of ports and way stations that prefigured later Greek trade hubs. Not everyone's convinced. Critics point to the ship's distinctly un-Greek features, like the absence of the keel that later became a hallmark of Greek design. And the personal effects. A scarab bearing Queen Nefertiti's name, Canaanite daggers, and a gold chalice engraved with Mesopotamian motifs suggest a crew as multicultural as a modern container ship's. But supporters counter that early Greek mariners might have served as hired hands on such vessels, absorbing techniques while transporting goods for wealthier empires. The most tantalizing clue lies in the wood itself. Tool marks on Uluburan's planks match those found in Aegean shipyards, not Phoenician or Egyptian ones. And the repairs, patches of lighter wood spliced into the hull, mirror Greek methods described in later texts. Even the ship's proportions, a length-to-beam ratio favoring speed over cargo space, align with Homer's descriptions of swift, hollow ships. What emerges isn't just a debate over one wreck, but a challenge to how we map maritime innovation. If Greek shipwrights were refining their craft this early, their triremes didn't spring from nowhere. They were the climax of a 1,000-year conversation between saw and sea. The Uluburan anomaly dares us to reconsider not just who built the first great ships, but who remembered their lessons long enough to change history. The Athenian dockyard inscriptions, carved meticulously into marble slabs, read like a ship captain's obsessive to-do list, except these weren't reminders, they were laws. Discovered near Piraeus' ancient naval yards, these 4th century BCE records catalog every rope, plank, and oar in Athens' fleet with bureaucratic precision. One fragment, chipped at the edges but still legible, orders daily inspections of hyposomata, those critical hull tension cables, with fines levied for any crew neglecting to check for fraying. Another mandates that spare masts be stored uphill, shielded behind a false wall in a quarry outside the city. This wasn't just maintenance, it was wartime paranoia codified into stone. The real revelation lies in the numbers. A nearly intact slab labeled Naval Reserve Inventory lists 120 triremes kept in reserve readiness, fully crewed but hidden in camouflaged ship sheds along secluded coves of Salamis. Modern historians always suspected Athens had backup fleets, but the sheer scale shocks even experts. These weren't rotting hulls, they were warships maintained to battle-ready condition, their wooden pegs regularly greased with beeswax, their rams polished monthly to prevent bronze corrosion. One line item specifies 40 talents of silver allocated for emergency pitch procurement, hinting at a shadow supply chain stretching to Macedonia's pine forests. But the most telling details are the punishments. A sailor caught stealing an oar loop. The leather strap securing oars to tolls faced not just fines, but demotion to the lowest rowing tier. Why such severity? Because Athens understood its empire lived and died by logistics. Break one strap during a chase, and a trireme could lose an oar, then speed, then the battle itself. The inventories even track individual oars by wood type, with fir reserved for upper tiers where flexibility mattered, and oak for lower tiers needing brute strength. Cross-referencing these lists with battle accounts uncovers eerie foresight. In 322 BCE, when Macedon launched a surprise naval raid, Athens mobilized 80 reserve ships within 72 hours, a feat only possible because those hidden triremes were, as the inscriptions prove, rotated into active service every 6 months for drills. The system was so refined, scribes noted which ships had their keels scraped last, prioritizing those with fresher hulls. What emerges isn't just a portrait of efficiency, but a chilling calculus. Athens didn't just build ships, it engineered redundancy, anticipating every weak link in the chain from rope fibers to human judgment. Those marble slabs, dull as they seem, were the real secret weapon, turning chaos into order long before the first oar hit the water. Modern shipwrights sweating under the Mediterranean sun quickly learn a hard lesson: ancient Greek techniques defy every instinct honed by centuries of naval engineering. Armed with nothing but replicas of bronze adzes and wooden mallets, teams like the Hellenic Navy's Experimental Archaeology Division have painstakingly reconstructed trireme hulls using only methods available 2,000 years ago. Their biggest shock, the so-called reverse clinker technique, where planks overlap downward instead of upward like medieval ships. At first glance, it seems illogical water could theoretically seep through the downward-facing seams. But when these reconstructed hulls hit the waves, the genius reveals itself. Each overlapping joint acts like a living hinge, allowing the entire hull to flex rhythmically with the waves instead of fighting them. One craftsman describes the moment of epiphany during sea trials. "We were braced for leaks, but the timbers just danced. The ship absorbed swells like a living thing." Instrument readings confirmed its flexibility wasn't a flaw, but a feature. Sensors embedded in the hull showed peak stresses 30% lower than modern rigid designs, explaining how ancient ships survived decades of Mediterranean storms. The reverse clinker seams, packed with wool and beeswax, actually tighten under pressure, creating a self-sealing effect that baffled the team. Then comes the real counterintuitive twist: the wood itself. While modern shipbuilders prize dry, seasoned timber, the Greeks worked with freshly cut planks still oozing sap. Experimental teams initially dismissed this as primitive necessity until they compared hulls. The green wood ships, after seawater soaking, developed a permanent set, their fibers memorizing the ideal curvature, while kiln-dried replicas warped unpredictably. The ancients weren't cutting corners, they were exploiting organic material science we've since forgotten. Perhaps the most humbling moment comes when testing ramming maneuvers. Modern engineers assumed bronze rams required rigid hulls to transfer impact force. Yet footage from underwater cameras shows the opposite. The flexible hulls recoil like a boxer rolling with a punch, dissipating energy that would shatter stiffer frames. It's a revelation that rewrites assumptions about ancient naval combat. These weren't blunt instruments, but precision machines harmonizing with the sea's violence rather than resisting it. The ultimate validation came unexpectedly. During a squall off Crete, a reconstructed trireme weathered winds that forced fiberglass yachts to retreat. As waves slammed the hull, the creaking timbers didn't groan in protest, they sang, their flexure absorbing shocks that would have shattered rigid constructions. One participant put it best: "We set out to prove how they built these ships, instead we learned why, and it's left us wondering what else we've misunderstood about the past." Rome's conquest of Greece didn't just transfer power, it shattered a continuum. By the time Byzantine shipwrights sketched their dramans in the 9th century, the trireme's precision had faded into folklore. The evidence is stark. Medieval warships reverted to single-tiered oar systems, their hulls broader and slower, their rams reduced to symbolic spikes. Historians long blamed this decline on Rome's landlubber priorities. Why invest in naval innovation when legions won battles? But newly deciphered cargo manifests from Constantinople tell a darker tale. Pages from the imperial dockyard's ledgers, preserved in a Venetian monastery, list materials that reveal a staggering truth. Byzantine builders couldn't replicate classical techniques even when they tried. Orders for Macedonian fir vanish after 600 CE, replaced by generic ship timber. The mortise and tenon joints that held triremes together for centuries give way to crude nail and plank construction. Something fundamental had been lost, not just resources, but knowledge. The culprit might lie in a fire that ravaged Alexandria's library in 415 CE. Among the countless scrolls reduced to ash were Archimedes' naval treatises, including his rumored On Floating Hulls, a text said to detail hull curvature ratios that maximized speed. Later Byzantine engineers, cut off from this wisdom, resorted to guesswork. A 10th century manuscript from Thessaloniki admits as much, its author lamenting that the ancients' methods are now as obscure as Atlantis. Even the hyposamata cables, the tensioned spines of Greek warships, disappear from records, their absence explaining why dramans cracked under the strain of ramming maneuvers. Yet the most haunting clues come from shipwrecks themselves. A Byzantine galley discovered off the coast of Yasiata in 1967 shows a tragic devolution. Its planks, once interlocked with geometric precision, are now clumsily nailed, the gaps stuffed with tar-soaked rags. Marine archaeologists found its ram, a pitiful iron stump compared to the sleek bronze predators of antiquity. Radiocarbon dating reveals a grim timeline. By 700 CE, Mediterranean shipwrights had regressed to techniques not seen since the Bronze Age. But here's the twist: loss wasn't universal. Isolated pockets preserved fragments of the old ways. In southern Italy, Greek-speaking monasteries secretly maintained shipbuilding manuals, their margins filled with sketches of triremes. A Venetian merchant's diary from 1100 describes a Cretan fisherman's boat with oars stacked like the ancients, suggesting oral traditions outlasted written ones. And in 2018, scholars poring over palimpsests in Sinai found ghostly traces of Archimedes' calculations, scraped away by medieval monks to make room for psalms, but still legible under ultraviolet light. The equations matched hydrodynamic principles only proven in the 1950s. The ultimate tragedy: this wasn't inevitable. When the Ottomans stormed Constantinople in 1453, they captured shipyards still using techniques unchanged since Rome. The knowledge hadn't vanished, it had been buried under empires that no longer asked the right questions. Perhaps the trireme's secrets didn't drown in the sea of time. They merely waited, like sunken rams encased in silt, for someone to dive deep enough to find them again. Greek shipbuilding didn't just move goods and warriors, it moved civilizations. While history books glorify land battles like Marathon or Thermopylae, the true engine of Mediterranean dominance was being hammered together in coastal shipyards. Every trireme launch wasn't just a weapon, it was a floating revolution that reshaped trade routes, dissolved borders, and forged empires. Consider this: Athens' golden age wasn't funded by olive groves or silver mines alone, but by the naval taxes it levied across the Aegean, a system only possible because its ships could reach farther, faster, and more reliably than any competitors. Now, breakthroughs in underwater archaeology are revealing secrets even the Greeks forgot. Autonomous drones equipped with sub-bottom profilers scan seafloors once considered too deep for exploration, while DNA analysis of shipworm patterns helps date wrecks to within decades. Off the coast of Sicily, a new generation of magnetometers has detected metallic anomalies that may be Carthaginian warships copied from captured Greek designs, proof of how quickly naval technology spread through imitation and espionage. And in the Black Sea's oxygen-starved depths, entire fleets wait perfectly preserved, their cargo holds still packed with amphorae that could rewrite our understanding of ancient supply chains. Yet for all our advanced tools, some mysteries resist solving. How did Greek navigators cross open waters without compasses? What undiscovered alloys made their rams so devastating? And where are the legendary 10-tiered ships mentioned in Syracuse's archives? Each season, underwater robots and deep-sea submersibles dive deeper into the abyss, chasing shadows of these lost marvels. So imagine standing on a trireme's deck as it slices through dawn-lit waves, the creak of timbers, the shouted commands, the sheer human audacity it took to conquer the unpredictable sea. Now it's your turn. Which Greek naval innovation leaves you awestruck? The mortise and tenon joints that outlasted empires, the hyposomata cables that turned hulls into living organisms, or perhaps the sheer organizational genius that kept hundreds of rowers moving as one? Share your pick below, and let's discuss, because somewhere in those ancient solutions, we might just find inspiration for our own uncharted waters. After all, the sea hasn't changed. Only the ships have.